going back to Willie Cushel, because and soil and other things, one of the things he did look at was compost, the things, and by compost, is Willie's terms, it's just a pile of rotting, of vegetation things. It's not hot composting going through, that's what we do here. He found that on the in the urban, in the human modified areas, compost, it was the beetles there were all introduced species. There were no native species came out to work in the compost in the urban environment, which I think is fascinating for itself, because remember what I just said before about the litter being broken down and everything? You'd expect some of them to come through. No, none. When he put some of the compost in the paddock, he got one or two native species there. When he put it into the native vegetation area, about half the beetle, the introduced species would come and work and go there. But you know, you get all these things together to realise how integrated things are and how little we know how things fit together going through. Here's a major thing when we talk what's going to happen here, because all this, while I'm saying this, we're leading on to what we have a walk around this sanctuary, Mahi Whanua. 22 years ago, this was kikuyu grass going through. So it was no natives here. There were been no native vegetation. There was some native vegetation, the coprosma out there. There's only a few bushes, but there's the native insects would only be those generalists who could actually come and live in some of the scattered parts which were around here, but very few. Now, after 10 years, it completely changed the look of the place, and now it is now home to some of the New Zealand natives, but it's still not the same as the unmodified area, few unmodified areas in Oakley Creek, the Aonao Walkway area. It will take time to heal, to come, to change for that. I see it's 3 o'clock.
Just one question.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the samples were taken of the insects years ago. Has there been any discernible sort of change in the over the last change of environment? You know, like in the glypholids, they change over time. But the insects got a very short life cycle. Have they changed?
We don't know. Is the short answer, and that's part of the whole thing. Things that requires a lot of effort to be able to do things. And this was, although Willie did this, as he said, as a hobby during his week time, it involved a lot of people in work for DSIR entomology, including my wife, to mount these beetles so they could be examined and preserved. And there's no money around to do that sort of thing. But that's the sort of thing that, for all the things, in the 1960s, when Willie set up our group, the systematics group, the first thing was to get a decent collection to know what was out there, the whole range, from Campbell Island, Auckland Islands, Chathams, all the Southern Alps, all the areas of native park, Omahuta, up north, that started to get a bit of Northland, came then special in the 1970s when do part. But then, as money became, you were expected to work on projects which you could see outcomes within a year or 2 years. The things, these are long-term things. You can't go and just go and say it is now done. It is going through. So that is one of the faults, as I see it, with the current system. It relies on people to do it, and people like to, some of it, to get paid for doing some of this work, which is then used and to help make decisions on. As say here, without this sort of work, people now start to recognise the importance of conserving small areas of native vegetation, second growth, whatever, going through. But when you're doing your planning, it's all very well to have a few specimen trees around and plants and look nice, but what else are you doing?
Yeah.
And it comes down to also what I will go on for here, the soil here. Adrian made the comment right at the start, and I'll say here, when we fought for the place this 4 years ago, going through, and it was 3 years ago that this land was purchased by the government, by the Crown, for the ill-fated Kiwi build, but it was purchased under the Land for Housing program. Land for housing, that is a separate thing to Kiwi build. Kiwi build is part of it. And their whole idea, before it was been going, there's going to be, taking it off here, just think, this is some of the best soil, volcanic soil, growing here in the Auckland area. They were just going to be, as a casual, scrape it off, sell it off probably, and replace it with some muck. Yeah. One of the solutions was, okay, well, we can take some of the soil and just put it on the other side if that would work, without realising that crop is a very European perspective. This site has got history to it. That is not the Maori point of view. That's not the part. This site, as we were shown, has had Maori gardening implements found on it in 2007 by Richard May, going through. And they are now over, most of them are over in the Marae Unitech. And that was really the thing. We have now, as part of our thing for saving the place, we made sure this was actually registered as an archaeological site, because it hadn't been before.
Great.
Yeah, and that was part of the things. There's a history here. We know that Maori cultivated this land. How many other places are there on the isthmus here where you can grow such a relatively large area now? It's all now compact. It's all over, destroyed by housing.
In South Auckland, it's been happening for years in South Auckland, and potato land, which it was famous for, hasn't been growing anything else.
Yeah.
So we are losing things.
There are things, but then it's the difference here for what we want to do is we've got soil here, not dirt, going through. I'll probably talking to the right audience here to say, no, this is a living land here. And not only for the area that we've got, most places, most community gardens have to actually have raised beds, because you can't, the soil has been contaminated by, this area has never been built on. You can grow directly in the ground. So all these things, when you talk about valuable land, examples going through, archaeological site, let alone the ecostructure, we've got duplicates of rare offshore island trees, which show soon. So it's all, this is a special place. 6,500 square metres. Okay, so that'll be the first part. When the land was sold, it was written into the sale agreement to the Crown that this space was going to be maintained for future generation as an educational and space. What we've been trying to do is we're talking to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development people. The land here is owned by the Crown, and people don't realise the complications of the land, because under the 2014 Mana Whenua Redress Act for the Tamaki Makaurau, the land here, and hospital board land, where the hospital was, that became right of first refusal land. So what is happening for treaty settlements, the land here is going back to Mana Whenua. We still have to have discussions with Mana Whenua for things. We know that they have got similar visions to what we have. The Mason Clinic over here, they actually purchased a bit of extra space that the Crown had bought for housing. Under the agreement, suddenly complications, oh heck, going through. Because this land, when it was purchased, went from the Crown to the education, was as health department, health, or Ministry of Health, it was in 1991. Oakley Hospital, Carrington, then closed, was then leased to Unitec on a 99-year lease at nil rent. In 2017, the title to the land was then given to Unitec, so they could then sell it for the 29 hectares for about $132 million. It was basically a government bailout to Unitec from land which they received with no cost and just maintained, and with doing it for their new buildings. And as well as that, they had to, Unitec then took on had a $50 million facility loan, which they've used part of it, which has to be repaid, which may be some more land. But what the complications are with at the time of the unitary plan being approved, when it first came through, the sanctuary was in the plan as open space for the area. During discussions with the council and Unitec on what to do, Unitec made an aside that they may move the green space closer to the bound, slightly northwards by a few hundred metres, up against the Mason Clinic. That happened at a general mediation meeting, so it ended up what we thought was safe green space was then over there by the Mason Clinic. And at the meeting, when we found out from the council, when we went to the council to find out why the open space had changed, the chief planner who was at that meeting said, well, Unitec just said they're just going to just move it, there's nothing special about it.
They don't come and look at areas.
No, they had nothing there. No, they had nothing there, and so nothing there, and so that was the first. Fighting for the place was really quite hard. There's going to be changes around here. There's a glass house just across the way with the Wairaka stream going round. Next month, that glass house is going down, and they're going to start daylighting the stream. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Development had the things. At the moment, it's channeled in a part, and it's always been a desire to go and have it open again. And now, some years ago, in 2004, there's the tank here, 10,000 litre, and one up the top there. That was to bring water from the stream to there. That ceased with Unitec. Under the unitary plan, it is a permitted activity to take up to 5 cubic metres of water a day from the stream, and we want to go and bring that in to become more self-sustaining with water. Because over the last 2 years, 2 years ago, the electricity feed into this area, Crown land, got a fault, which is too major to repair, had to wait. So we've got no electricity, that's why we've got solar lighting. In November, the town water supply was cut off. That that was coming through a meter through Unitec, and through the leakages, it was reckoned this was costing them close to $8,000 a month in water leakage. What was happening, as I think what was happening, as the infrastructure, all the leaks were fixed around Unitec, because there was a lot of leaks in the water system. It put strain on other parts of the system. It got bursting. So since mid-November, we've been able to get together some rain barrels to save things, and there's a couple of tanks up there which pump water up, but there's been hand watering for this area since November. So we look for the rain. Last year this rainfall was really low, as you can well remember. It was really, but at least we had hoses to use, even though you couldn't use. As soon as the lockdown finished and take everyone relief, you could then use hoses again, but not sprinklers. Well, at that stage, that would seem to be great, but at the time, no, we wanted a bit more than that. What we get here, rainfall figures since 2016 to now, we know that there's 2 or 3 months of the year which is dry, and where the evapotranspiration rate is greater than the rainfall going through. But we don't know which months it is between basically September. Oh, good, thanks. We can now, tea and other things off here. Yeah, and we'll do as well.
Have you experimented with the French intensive method to improve the microclimate around your plant?
Oh, we're doing it, we're mulching, we're doing a whole lot of things with the what was protection for the rabbits is probably good for the rest of, for helping to create a bit of microclimate there anyway.
And some Bob used to say if you have 27% of your land in trees, you can double your crop production.
Yeah, well, we have around here, and that's why this eco-structure was put in, 20% is there as the eco-structure of trees, native and exotic, of various types that flower at all different times of the year, so there's food for the insects and birds all times of the year, fruits or berries. That was one of the things that Brendan Harari put when this was planned in 1998, 1999, for putting in first the eco-structure protection. The swale just out of here was one of the first in Auckland. The food forest is the first multi-layered food forest. Although it got out of hand, we have to try to bring it back to some sort of things. Just going back to the land here, because I just want to say for the complications, you realise this block of land was part of 12,000 acres that was made available by Te Kawau and 5 Ngāti Whātua chiefs on the was it 29th of June 1841, going through, and it's so-called the Waitemata to Manukau block. That's the big things, and it's from the Maori perspective, the land was not being used, so they wanted also Auckland to be the capital for the Governor Grey to be able to sit here. They wanted protection, the Maori wanted protection from their enemies, the Ngāpui, because this area, 1820s, 1830s, was basically devoid of people after the battles. It's hard to think of it nowadays, but this was a big battleground area, and it was basically unpopulated going through. So for £200, 4 horses, 30 blankets, 10 cloaks and 1 tent and 1 desk, the land, 12,000 acres, was given to the Europeans. The Europeans took it as being sold. I guess from what I believe the Maori perspective would be they were given use of that land. And this is why all the stories, complications of the land, why this space and other things, remnants, we've got to remember not just what is now, but what is in the past, because that's going to guide what's in the future too.
So a little bit like Ikumata.
It is.
It's a very special place.
It is.
Not a lot around anymore.
And it may be the mana whenua who got I Matao, may be the people here. The Mason Clinic people, Dame Naida Glassy, she wants to be at the new land. They want to build up a garden for Māori for healing there going through. So our visions align. It's just a matter of working together. We have been able to talk because until things are ready to go, you're kept at one side. We sell some of our produce at the Gradland Farmers Market. Because you go through, this place is also special for organics, for those who were here in 8th of November 2002. It was the launch of Organic Farm New Zealand this year. The accrediting agent, one of the accrediting agencies for organics going through, and on the corner there, by the car park, there's an olive tree that was planted by the Honourable Jim Sutton, who was their Minister of Agriculture, and just inside the entranceway there's a Fijo, which was planted by Jeanette Fitzsimmons as a green co-leader. Goes through. So there's a lot of history for organics. In the year 2000, as Brendan Harare said, that one of the biggest organic conferences of the time was organised here, and that's where it was Eco Nation 2020 phrase came through, where this was going to be the vision for 2020, to have a whole lot of these around the country. Well, it has not happened around the country, but organics is around the country for all the time. Because this was a wider area, including all the part here, it wasn't just the garden, that was the Mahi Whenua. It was looking at what to call this place, so that's why it's called horticology. It was horticulture plus ecology. Yeah.